Yes, thank you very much. It's interesting that Ian chose a frog in his last cartoon, which for Brits in their less diplomatic moments is a way to talk about the French.
Could have been a toad.
Okay, good. Now I've lived in France for 18 years, so I know what this is all about. Anyway. If one wants to understand this financial crisis, that is not easy, but one thing one needs to understand in that case is how global imbalances relate to the financial crisis. And actually, Cynthia has already done an excellent job in bringing to the table a number of very important elements. Now, the fact that global imbalances would eventually contribute to a global financial crisis and economic crisis is not something that we have not seen coming. I mean, I remember when I was still working in the OECD in 2004, when we worked on the June Economic Outlook, we had a chapter on how the unwinding of global imbalances, or the disorderly unwinding of global imbalances, would eventually lead to a financial and economic crisis. And the channels we highlighted there were not exactly the one that in the end, in reality, played a major role. So we got it wrong on some points. We thought at the time that the global imbalances, because they, as Cynthia has explained, led to this huge demand for liquid, safe assets, and the US being the only one that could provide this, we thought that that would in the end not be sustainable and lead to a confidence crisis, with international capital being withdrawn from the United States, then leading to a collapse in the euro, in the US dollar, and a soaring of their interest rates. Now, the way the crisis unfolded was not this way, and the reason is precisely as Cynthia has explained, because a sort of a shadow banking system emerged, and which basically, due to the housing problem, fell under its own weight. So we haven't seen the collapse in the US dollar, even though it has depreciated quite a lot. We haven't seen withdrawal of foreign capital from the United States, but it could still happen. So we think that the Damocles sword of an unpleasant or disorderly unwinding of global imbalances, that risk is still present. Now, but the point is, even an orderly unwinding of global imbalances would be detrimental, potentially detrimental for the euro area. And why is this the case? This is the case because we're now still in a situation where emerging market economies, and China is, of course, the most important among those, still have this very high propensity to save, and they still maintain these currency pegs to the US dollars. What that means is that once the US dollar starts to fall, and that would then be instrumental to reducing its current account deficit, then because of the pegs and because of the high propensity to save in China, we would end up with the euro area having to assume the role of shock absorber. It will need to, if both the renminbi and the US dollar depreciate, it can only depreciate against another currency, and that other currency happens to be the euro. So the euro would appreciate, and if the US current account deficit falls, but the Chinese surplus doesn't fall in concert, then the euro area will have to show a higher current account deficit, which is consistent with an appreciating euro. So that would be the scenario the European Commission likes to avoid. And to avoid that, we would need to persuade the Chinese to reduce the propensity to save. That's easier said than done, but still that's what has to be done. And also to ease their, or abandon their exchange rate back to the US dollar. In that case, this asymmetric unwinding of global imbalances could be avoided. It could still be problematic, but at least then not the euro area would not be the major victim of this unwinding scenario. Now, what will happen next once we've got rid of these global imbalances and it has been unwinding in a more or less controlled way? Will then the euro emerge as a global reserve currency? As Cynthia has already quite correctly explained to us, in order for that to happen, we would need a very liquid and deep financial market for, and in particular for risk-free assets. That poses tremendous governance problems because we can only have one unified liquid bond market in the euro area if governments, member states, are prepared to give up part of their fiscal sovereignty, which of course at the moment they're clearly not. So it's really a non-starter. At various levels in the EU, the idea is launched from time to time to create a euro bond or whatever it's called, but every time it hits huge political obstacles. So this is not something for tomorrow. But on the other hand, there is a historical precedence in this regard, and that historical precedent is the United States itself. After all, a major transfer of fiscal sovereignty of the US member states to the federal government took place precisely in the wake of the Great Depression, when the federal income tax was established. So maybe that's what's ahead of us, but it is pure speculation. Now, the final point is, even if the euro becomes a international reserve currency, major international reserve currency, would it necessarily be the only international reserve currency? Well, not necessarily so. In the past several centuries, we have had many quite extended periods where actually there were side by side several reserve currencies. As I say, international currencies that serve the purpose of international accounting unit or as invoicing currencies typically have only one, because there you have the huge network and incumbency advantages of a single international currency. But you don't necessarily have that for reserve currency. So you could well end up with a situation where the US dollar and the euro side by side serve as global reserve currencies. As Cynthia has already mentioned, it's less likely to happen for the renminbi because the Chinese financial markets are still not liquid enough. So I'd like to stop here and hope this will stimulate the discussion.